All right, let's get started. Today, we're gonna talk about the history of the People's Republic of China from 1949 to 1966. So last time we talked about China's experience in World War II and how the Civil War broke out immediately after World War II between the Communist Party and the Nationalist Party. The Civil War was between 1946 to 1949. Ending in the defeat of the Nationalist Party. Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Nationalist Party, and his followers had to flee to Taiwan, and they maintained their rule there until the Nationalist Party maintained their rule there all the way until the 1990s. So we're going to talk about the history of what's known as China after 1949. So first, let's talk about Taiwan a little bit, because Taiwan really is a very important issue that is sort of affecting the international order and the security and peace in the Pacific Ring, in the Asia Pacific area, right? Taiwan. So you really have to understand the issue of Taiwan to understand the tension between the United States and China today. So we're gonna briefly talk about the so-called Taiwan issue. Okay, so if you look at the history of Taiwan, for thousands of years, it's just an island in the West Pacific, where the Chinese Empire did not have much interest to rule for most of the time in Chinese history. There are native people living there. The native Taiwanese, they're not Chinese. They don't speak Chinese. They speak a Polynesian language. Actually, recent anthropological study have found out that most of the Polynesian peoples, including people in Hawaii, people in the Easter Island, and many other people many other native peoples in the South Pacific, they probably share the same ancestor in Taiwan. So thousands of years ago, the original ancestors of all Polynesian language speaking peoples, they set out from Taiwan to explore the ocean. So this is why the native people in Taiwan, today they still speak a sort of Polynesian language. Okay, so how Chinese migrated to Taiwan? Chinese migrated to Taiwan quite late, actually. During probably the Lei Ming and the Qing dynasty, during the Qing dynasty. For the 200 years of the Qing, there are many Chinese they're migrated to Taiwan from Fujian province, right? If you look at the map, right? This is the map. Fujian province is here. So over the past 200 years, many Han Chinese speaking Fujian or Fuzhou dialect, they migrated to Taiwan. Okay, so the Chinese migration to Taiwan is quite late, actually. And the Qing government, the Qing Empire, set up a local administration in Taiwan, right? For example, one of my ancestors, actually my grandfather's great grandfather, served as the county magistrate in Taiwan. And his name is Wei Ying. Yeah, he served as the county magistrate of the Fengshan County. In today's Kaohsiung city in Taiwan. So yeah, so the Qing government had their own administration in Taiwan until the first Sino-Japanese War, right? We talked about this. The Sino-Japanese War was between 1894 to 1895. As a result of the defeat of the Qing Empire was defeated by Japan, by the Japanese Empire. As a result, the Qing Empire had to give Taiwan to Japan. So Taiwan became Japan's overseas colony. Okay, and this situation remained in Taiwan until the end of World War II in 1945. So the colonial experience of Taiwan under Japanese rule was from 1895 to 1945. Okay, but during this time period, although the majority of the population in Taiwan, they were Chinese descendants, but they received colonial education and a colonial rule by Japan. right? This situation is sort of similar to Okinawa, right? We know that Okinawa became Japan's colony in the 1870s, about 20 years before Taiwan. So Japan sort of maintained the same colonial rule in both Okinawa and Taiwan. So that means Japanese language is a dominant language. All education is to inculcate this Japanese national identity among the local people, right? So Taiwanese during these 50 years of colonial rule, they had to speak Japanese at a school, at all official formal occasions, but they may speak their the Taiwanese, the Fujianese dialect at home. So it's sort of a situation is kind of complicated. So when World War II broke out, Taiwan certainly provided Japan with their own resources and manpower. For example, many Taiwanese served in the Japanese Imperial Army invading China, because many Taiwanese they can speak Chinese, right? So they worked as interpreters for the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. And as a result, Taiwan was also bombed by the Allies, just like Japan's homeland. So right before Japan surrendered, there's a sense of a desperation in Taiwan, because people are talking about we're gonna lose the war, right? So because Taiwanese identity is that they belong to Japan, they're part of Japan. But then in August 1945, when Japan declared surrender, the Chinese came over to Taiwan saying, no, you didn't lose the war. We won the war. So think about the situation in Taiwan. So yesterday, Taiwanese are saying we're losing the war. But today they're saying we're winning. Chinese were winning. Because for mainland Chinese, Taiwan is part of China. So the people from mainland China, they consider the Taiwan as their compatriots, right? So the message is that we win the war. So a lot of times in history, identity is quite complicated. Identity means what country you think you belong to, or what kind of a political force or human groups you think you belong to. This is a quite complicated area, right? So is Taiwanese Japanese or Taiwanese or Chinese? It's difficult to say. It's very difficult to say. But what happened after 1949? I'm sorry. What happened after World War II in 1945 is that Chiang Kai-shek's government sent officials to rule Taiwan. But before 1949, Chiang Kai-shek did not pay much attention to the island, because it's just a remote island, right? With only millions of people living there. So Chiang Kai-shek, the officials sent from mainland China, they're pretty corrupt. So some Taiwanese, they welcomed the arrival of mainland Chinese officials at first, right? So some Taiwanese still maintain the Chinese identity, so they welcomed this return of Taiwan to China. But very quickly they found out that Chiang Kai-shek's government is very corrupt. Okay, very corrupt. So they got very disappointed. And then in 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek lost the civil war in mainland China, so if we look at the map, in 1949, Chiang Kai-shek lost the civil war. Chiang Kai-shek and his and the army loyal to him had to all migrate to Taiwan, this island. So all of a sudden, the tension or the conflict between mainlanders and the local Taiwanese became it was escalated. The people, the Chinese from mainland, they're all newcomers, but they controlled the government. They monopolized all the governments, all the important businesses, and they pushed the local Taiwanese out of the government. So the local Taiwanese thought that they were sort of discriminated against, right? So in 1949, there was a riot called February 28th incident. So basically, in this incident, the Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist party government, they sort of bullied the local people on the market, and then it sort of caused a riot of local Taiwanese against the government. And it became a sort of a genocide on both sides. Local Taiwanese, they're killing the mainlanders. If they found someone who don't speak Taiwanese. They would kill him, beat him up. And then, of course, Chiang Kai-shek also sent an army to those cities where riots broke out to kill the local people. So this is a genocide on both sides, but this is sort of became a scar in the local memory of Taiwanese. And Chiang Kai-shek basically used Taiwan. This is a picture taken when Chiang Kai-shek was in Taiwan. He made a speech to criticizing himself. He says, we nationalist party made this huge mistake. We lost Taiwan. We lost millions of troops in Taiwan. We lost the civil war, and I am the one to blame. And he was so emotional that he burst into tears in the speech. Chiang Kai-shek, between 1949 to 1975, when he died, he never forget about his ambition to recover mainland China. He basically used Taiwan as sort of a military base to prepare for a counterattack to mainland China, to take it back. He always wanted to take back something he lost, but of course, this never happened. It's never happened. Okay, yeah, on the coast of the territories controlled by the Nationalist Party facing mainland China, you will see this sign: 三民主义统一中国. It means unified China with the Sun Yat-sen's principles of three principles of people. Remember we talked about that, right? The Sun Yat-sen's three principles of people. Yeah, democracy, nationalism, and livelihood, right? But on the other hand, okay, this is a propaganda poster on the mainland China part. Okay, the Communist Party that controlled mainland China also wanted to unify Taiwan. So from 1949 to the 1970s, both governments of China wanted to defeat each other. They wanted to sort of unify China, but neither side was successful. So the situation is that in today's world, there are still two governments that claim to be China. One is the PRC, People's Republic in Beijing. The other is Republic of China in Taiwan. After Chiang Kai-shek died in 1975, there is a lot of a local consciousness rising among Taiwanese people, because when Chiang Kai-shek was there, Chiang Kai-shek certainly suppressed local people's sort of their self-identity. And the governments and the powers are controlled by Chiang Kai-shek's followers. And they're all from mainland China. Okay? But after Chiang Kai-shek died, Chiang Kai-shek's son, Jiang Jingguo, became the president. But in the 1980s, Jiang Jingguo launched a series of reform that turned Taiwan into a democratic state. So Taiwan became democratic in the early 1990s. Okay, and then as a result, there's more freedom given to people. So the new generation of Taiwanese, they had very little connection with the mainland China, and they lived in Taiwan, this independent regime, and sort of this isolated island for decades. So they don't share any identity with the mainland China. Some more and more Taiwanese, they don't think they're Chinese. So their identity is changing. They're changing, right? So this is how complicated Taiwan issue is, right? So, first the Taiwanese had this Japanese colonial experience, and then they got to return. Taiwan got to return to China after World War II, right? And then when Chiang Kai-shek came, Chiang Kai-shek sort of tried to turn Taiwan into a military base, and then when Chiang Kai-shek died, the local Taiwanese consciousness or awareness is rising. There's more and more Taiwanese think they're not connected with China, and of course, no one wanted to attack mainland China. They just want to maintain their independence and their own way of life. That's what most Taiwanese want to do. But on the other hand, for mainland China, for the PRC government, they always say Taiwan is part of China, and they never gave up the attempt to unify Taiwan one way or another in the future, either militarily or peacefully. When Deng Xiaoping was there, the message is that the party, the Communist Party, prefer a peaceful unification. But now, when Xi Jinping rose to power 10 years ago, the tone from Beijing is that they probably going to use military methods. So if this happens, this will put United States in a sort of difficult situation, right? Okay, a very brief history of about why Taiwan is so important in the Sino-US relationship. Okay, Sino means China, China-US relationship. Before Chiang Kai-shek died, actually before 1971, United States did not recognize PRC in Beijing, okay, as a legitimate government. United States only recognized Chiang Kai-shek's government in Taiwan as the legitimate Chinese government. And Taiwan, the government in Taiwan, in Taipei, is an ally of the United States. This situation continued all the way to 1971, when President Nixon made a decision that in order to find a stronger and a more powerful ally against the Soviet Union, which is a more important enemy, Nixon decided that he's going to normalize the diplomatic relationship with China, and Taiwan is going to be the sacrifice. Okay, so Nixon visited Beijing, and literally sort of created a de facto alliance with Beijing. This happened in the early 1970s. So as a result, China was recognized as the legitimate government of, PRC was recognized as the legitimate government of China in the 1970s. And the PRC government was welcomed to the United Nations in New York. Of course, this is all supported by United States. So Taiwan's position in the Security Council of the United Nations was replaced by PRC. So this happened in the 1970s. Taiwan certainly thought it was betrayed, right? Chiang Kai-shek, of course, thought he was betrayed. But this is the decision of the United States, okay? So United States and China formed an alliance in the 1970s against the Soviet Union, because both powers, they did not like the Soviet Union. We're going to talk about how China and the Soviet Union got split up later. It's kind of a complicated diplomatic history. But United States, although recognized Beijing as the legitimate government of China, United States did not totally forget about the promise they gave to Taiwan. So there is a Taiwan Relations Act passed in the Congress to promise that United States basically is going to maintain a so-called policy of ambiguity, of vagueness. So that means United States is going to say to both Taiwan and Beijing, saying, we recognize that there's only one China in the world, okay? But what is that one China depends on your definition, okay? But on the other hand, the United States is against any military change, any change of the status quo in Taiwan Strait by military force. So that means when Chiang Kai-shek was there, United States did not allow Chiang Kai-shek to launch a counterattack on mainland. But on the other hand, United States is going to protect Taiwan if mainland China is going to attack Taiwan militarily. So United States only want to see the status quo. Nothing changed, okay? Nothing changed. Two governments is fine. So this is the policy of vague. It's a vague policy, and the United States is gonna against any change in the political situation in Taiwan without the consent, peaceful consent from the peoples on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. But we know that over the past 10 years, the military threat from mainland China is escalating. Okay, Xi Jinping is using the wealth accumulated through the economic reform. He is probably preparing for a military attack on Taiwan. So in that case, is the United States going to help Taiwan or not? We will see. This remains unclear, remains very unclear. But according to the Taiwan Relations Act, the United States is going to help Taiwan in one way or another. But to what degree and in what way the United States is going to help Taiwan if mainland China is going to attack is a big question. It's a big question. But we know that this could lead to a military conflict between United States and China, which are the two most economically powerful and perhaps militarily most powerful countries in the world. So if a war breaks out in Taiwan, that's gonna be a very, very important event in history. Any questions? Okay, so then let's move on to mainland China. Let's talk about mainland China. Since 1949, the Communist Party started to build a new government in entire mainland China, following the Soviet Union model, but with some modifications. Okay, so the similarity between PRC and the Soviet Union is that is a domination of one Communist Party. Okay, in the Soviet Union case, of course, the Soviet Communist Party is the only party that is ruling the whole country, right? But in China, yes, the Chinese Communist Party is certainly dominant. But on the other hand, they allowed some kind of several so-called democratic parties to rule. But those so-called democratic parties, they're basically rubber stamps in the Congress. Yeah, all these so-called democratic parties, they all follow strictly the Communist Party rule. Okay, so if you look at the party structure, okay, so let's first look at the party structure. You have a chairman, right? Chairman Mao, who is also the president of China, and he's also the chair of the Chinese Communist Party's military commission. So he is a 3-in-1 leader. I call him a 3-in-1 leader. So first, Mao is the chairman of the party, and underneath him, there's a Chinese Communist Party, CCP means the Chinese Communist Party, Standing Committee of the Politburo, okay? The Standing Committee of the Politburo is right under Mao. There are roughly between like 5 to 9 members, depending on the time. And then underneath the Standing Committee of the Politburo, you have a Politburo. Politburo's members range from like 20 to like 30, right? They're normally the party boss in each province, or the party bosses in the state council, right? Very important people. They make decision, right? They make decision. And underneath the Politburo, you have the CCP Central Committee. The Central Committee have, I don't know, hundreds of party members. I mean, nominally they're elected by the ordinary party members according to a party's constitution, but actually they're selected. They're actually selected by their boss. Okay, so for each territorial unit, like Jiangsu province, Hunan province, Fujian province, each province has a party, right? A provincial party boss. He's called the party secretary. It's party secretary of that province. And at the same time, each province will also have a governor, okay? So you have sort of a dual system in each province, right? The party boss in that province is more powerful than the governor, okay? So sometimes it's the same people, it's the same person. The same structure can be seen at a city level and a town level, right? Each city and town will have a city mayor, but at the same time, there is also a city secretary, party secretary. Well, the party secretary is always more powerful than the mayor. Okay, so don't be fooled by the dual system. It's actually a one system. It's a one single system. Yeah. All right. Let me show you this. This a township. It's a county government. Okay, the county government is one office building. I mean, this picture is from years ago, so the building looks kind of crappy. But nowadays, most of the county governments has really magnificent buildings because China accumulated a lot of wealth through the economic reform. Yeah, some of the counties' government building is even larger than the White House, actually. But the reason I want to show you this picture is that I want to show you that the people's government and the party's office normally is in the same place. Even though they're separate, the government always follows the party rule, always. So it's a party state. It's a party state. Okay. So that's the party system. And then you also have the civilian government state system. State council, it's just sort of like the federal government here. It has all these different departments or ministries underneath it, right? Yeah, the Chinese State Council's leader is a premier, right? The premier normally follows the party boss. Normally follows the party boss. Actually, always follow the party boss. So we don't have any examples when the premier of the state council challenges the power of the party boss. It never happened in the history of PRC. And then you have different local governments. We talk about this. Each province has a governor. Each city has a mayor. They're all actually selected by their party boss on the higher level. But nominally, governors and provincial governors and city mayors, they are elected, nominally elected by the People's Congress on their administrative level. So how does this work is that the party maintains a perfect control of the People's Congress on the national level and on the local level. So the so-called representatives in the People's Congress, they're not really elected by people, although they're called, ironically, they're called People's Congress. But the Chinese congressmen, they're always selected by the party, just to make sure that they will vote as a rubber stamp for the party, vote for anyone that the party wants to select to fill the positions. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so although there is a People's Congress in Beijing and there's a Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, sort of like the Senate and the House of Representatives, but actually all these are perfectly controlled by the party. So that's the state system. So we talk about the party system, we talk about the state system, and then we're going to talk about the army system, the military system. By the way, in 1949, Mao is the leader for all these three systems. He's a 3-in-1 leader. No one can challenge him. He's a party boss, he's the chairman of the party, he's the president of Chinese state, and he's the chairman of the CCP Central Military Commission. Okay, the Chinese military system is not loyal to the state. Okay, well, here we know that the Pentagon must follow White House, right? Because United States, the president of the United States is the commander of the American military force. But this is not the case in China. Okay, the Chinese military force is not loyal to the state; it's only loyal to the party. Okay, so to a certain degree, you can say the PRC, the People's Liberation Army, is a party army. It's a party army. Okay. So so in other words, whoever is the chair of the military commission actually controls China. So to a certain degree, this is sort of some scholars argue that this is sort of a warlord tradition. Remember the warlords we talk about, right? In 1920s, 30s, right? Chiang Kai-shek later became a warlord himself. Even Sun Yat-sen want to use the method of a warlord to militarily unify China. And Mao was certainly very successful in unifying conquering China in 1949, right? I mean, Chinese people did not vote for the Communist Party to rule China, right? Mao won the civil war. Mao and his party won the civil war, and this is why they created a new government. Okay, so no election. So within the party, whoever controls the army, that means who is the chair of the military commission, is the boss. So when Mao was there, Mao was always the chair of the military commission. Mao was always the chairman of the party, and Mao, most of the time, was the president of China. But for all these three positions, the most important position for Mao is the military commission chair. Okay, this is because Mao has a saying. He is saying that 枪杆子里面出政权, governance comes from the barrel of a gun. That's what Mao said. Okay, so whoever has a gun has the say, has the power. Okay, the same thing. I mean, when Xi Jinping is there, Xi Jinping is again the 3-in-1 leader in China. Xi Jinping is the party boss, although no one caused. I mean, after Mao died, the party decided that they're gonna remove the chairmanship, so no one is gonna be the chair. So Xi Jinping is the so-called secretary in general, 总书记, okay, secretary in general for the party, okay, the number one in party. And Xi Jinping is also the president of China, so he visits other country on behalf of China as its president. But most importantly, Xi Jinping is the chair of the CCP Central Military Commission. So that means if he doesn't like anyone, the ultimate methods he's gonna use is military power. He's gonna use military to remove any of his rivals. Well, he did not have to so far because I mean the police system is under his control. The intelligence system, the national security agents system is under his control. He did not have to use the army. He simply need to just use the police and the intelligence agents, the secret police, to remove anyone he did not like. All right. So if you look at China, so that's the basic structure of CCP, and it continues to today. So if you want to understand China, just remember this PowerPoint page. This is the situation in China, very different from the United States. Okay, here we have checks and balances. We have White House, we have Congress, we have Supreme Court, we have independent media, press, right? All these are the different institutions we have in the United States. But in China, there is no checks and balances. There are very little checks and balances. In other words, no one can challenge Mao, no one can challenge Xi Jinping. Okay, no checks and balance. The number one leader of China can easily turn his own will, personal will, into policies. For example, since 2 years ago, since 2020, Xi Jinping decided that he's gonna have a zero COVID policy. That means they're gonna eliminate COVID in China. So dozens of cities have locked up. Okay. Tens of millions of people got locked up in their homes. Of course, there's a lot of complaints, right? But no one can change those policies because their number one leader decided so. So in other words, Mao and Xi, their power, in my opinion, is much greater than traditional emperor. Yeah, don't think they're emperor, okay? You may think they're Chinese emperor. They're more than emperors. Their power is much greater than emperors. Yeah, traditional emperors never had this kind of power. Okay, I mean, think about, say, Qianlong Emperor. We talked about him last time. Did Qianlong Emperor have the power to lock up ordinary Chinese in their home? Tens of millions of them. Traditional Chinese Empire did not have the capability to do this, but modern state can. Modern state can. Okay, so yeah. All right. So if you look at China, the areas marked by this yellow color are the so-called ethnic minorities autonomous region, but don't be fooled, they're not really autonomous. Okay, they're just like these autonomous regions, just like other provinces of China. They're not autonomous at all. For example, right now there's a zero COVID lockup policy in Xinjiang. Millions of people are locked up their home. Okay, local Xinjiang government had no say. Okay, they cannot challenge or disobey the order from Beijing. So it's all vertical. It's a pyramid. It's a hierarchically ruled system. Okay, but there are lots of ethnic minorities living in China. So I want to point that out. The pink areas are all areas. Most of them are have local population that are Han Chinese. But some of them are actually but some of these provinces actually have a lot of ethnic minorities like Qinghai, Sichuan, and Yunnan. Actually, there are a lot of ethnic minorities in Yunnan. But for historical reasons that can be traced back to 1949, there are 5 so-called ethnic autonomous regions established, including the Mongolian autonomous region, the Xinjiang Uyghur autonomous region. Yeah, there are many Turkish language speaking ethnic minorities living in Xinjiang And then there's a Tibet autonomous region, and there is a Guangxi Zhuang autonomous region. Zhuang is one of the southern ethnic minorities. There are many ethnic minorities living in southern China. Their languages similar to, say, Vietnamese, Thai, or Burmese people, or yeah. So also many languages spoken in southern China. So China remains a sort of a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multinational republic, right? Officially, it's called a republic, but more and more people are calling it a modern empire, Okay. Now, look at the policies in the 1950s. The policies in the 1950s is to follow Soviet Union, is to modernize China and build a modern Chinese state following the Soviet Union model, okay? We already covered the political system. Political system is basically a copy of the Soviet Union with some modifications. For example, the Chinese allowed some so-called democratic parties to share the rule as long as they follow the Communist Party. Mao, the first country Mao visited after the creation of PRC is the Soviet Union. Mao visited Moscow and talked to Stalin, Joseph Stalin. As a result, he got some more financial assistance from Soviet Union. Soviet Union sent hundreds of advisors, technicians, professors, advisors to China to help PRC to build like factories, shipyards, important industrial projects. Also like the bridge crossing the Yangtze River. This is the bridge in Nanjing City, crossing the Yangtze River. It was built in the 1950s. So one half of it was built by the Soviets. The other half was built by Chinese themselves, because in the early 1960s, China and the Soviet Union got split up. Okay, after Stalin died. But in the 1950s, the basic policy is to build a communist country, just like Soviet Union and the East European communist countries like Poland, Hungary, right, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, right? Ideology is Mao Zedong thought. Mao Zedong thought is propagated in entire China as the official ideology. Okay, Confucianism is denounced. Okay, is put into trash. Okay, and Mao Zedong thought is openly announced as China's ruling ideology. It focuses on class struggle, right? Focuses on the so-called dialectical materialism and the peasants and the importance of peasants. A mass line, that means the party is going to mobilize the population. There's a populist tendency or orientation in Maoism. And Mao later developed this new idea of permanent revolution. We're going to talk about that later. Okay, and the social policies. Social policies, the first thing they do, the party did, is land reform. That means they, as long as they control one city or one town or one village, the army is going to help to confiscate the land from the landholders. So no matter how much land you have, you may be a big landholder, you may be a small landholder, it doesn't matter. All land will be taken away from you by the state. Yeah, for example, unfortunately, my grandparents in Hunan province, they happen to be big landholders from the Republican period and from the Qing dynasty. Historically, they have held this big land since Qing dynasty, since 19th century. But in 1949 and 1950, during the land reform, all their land was taken away. Okay, no compensation. Yeah, in some cases, if a lot of the local villagers hate their landlord, the landlord will be executed immediately. Yeah, in 1950, during the land reform movement, close to 1 million landlords were executed. Yeah, without a trial, without a proper trial. So it's a very bloody very bloody movements to consolidate the party's rule in China. And then everyone, so the land was taken away. And then later, in 1957, the state, this is Mao's idea. Mao organized all Chinese population, rural population, into the so-called People's Commune. All the land belongs to the state. Even today in China, okay, if you go to Beijing to buy a house, buy an apartment, you may think you own the apartment, right? But no, you only have a partial ownership of the apartment. Because you only own the building, you don't own the land. The land belongs to the state. This is a windfall of the party from 1949, from the land reform. Okay, in land reform, the state take all the land. So even today, all the land officially, legally belongs to the state. If you buy an apartment in Beijing, you only buy the right to use the building for 70 years. You don't own the land. You never own the land because the land belongs to the state. So the land is the biggest asset and wealth of the state, if you think about that. Yeah. To a certain degree, actually, revolution is just a lawful way to rob other people. Okay. So land, through land reform, all the land was taken by the state. And then everybody later is organized into this People's Commune. So in the People's Commune, you basically become a state employee. Okay, you work on state land. Okay, and then close to more than 80 to 90% of your crops, your agricultural production was taken by the state. To a certain degree, you're like a slave of the state. This is called a collectivization. 集体化. Okay, collectivization was a Soviet Union experience. Yeah, Stalin did a collectivization in Soviet Union, which led to a huge famine in Ukraine. If you know Soviet Union history, right? In Ukraine, there's a huge famine because of collectivization. Same thing happened in China. Okay, after the collectivization, after people were organized into People's Commune, most of their products, no matter it's rice or potato or whatever, most of their people's agricultural products were taken away by the state. And then the state would provide the urban centers with the agricultural products, or sometimes they would sell it out to overseas to earn, foreign currency so that they can buy machinery from the West. So in other words, the communist state in China, they're extracting resources from the countryside, from the rural population to support modernization, to support industrialization, or to support whatever state projects they want to do. As a result, the peasants, they're exploited by the state, and a famine is just a matter of time. So in almost all communist countries that had a collectivization, you will see huge famine. So later we're going to talk about the Chinese famine, which is even greater than the Ukrainian famine that happened under Stalin. And then furthermore, all population in China was classified into different classes, right? According to Marxism, the state will look at you, how much money you have, to give you a class label. For example, you may be labeled as a rich landlord. If you're labeled as a rich landlord, you will have a hard time in China. Okay, although your land was already taken away by the state in 1949 and 1950, but you will still keep that label of a rich landlord on you, and you will become sort of a debased people in China. For example, your children cannot join the army, okay, and your children cannot go to college. You will be, if a movement comes, you will be the first one that is criticized and struggled. So you will have a lot of if you are labeled as a sort of a rich class, you will have a lot of problem in the society. And during Cultural Revolution, people can kill you on street without being punished just because of your class background. Yeah, so it creates a more social caste system under communism, ironically. because we know that communism is supposed to create a sort of an egalitarian, all right, sort of an equality among people, right? Brotherhoods, right? Equality, right? But no, actually, in reality, it creates more discrimination and oppression and a social caste system in China. Yeah. Okay, we don't have too much time to talk about all these details, but okay, very briefly, I want to tell you that in the 1950s, Mao launched a series of movements to eliminate all potential social forces that may pose a threat to the state, right? For example, religions are suppressed. Local lineages, big families, they're suppressed, they break down into nuclear families. This is a legalist tradition from like 2,000 years ago, right? Underground societies, even mafia groups, right? All the leaders of mafia groups, they are all arrested and executed immediately, okay? Because there is only one mafia that is allowed to exist in China. That is the party. Get that? Okay. So land reform. So this propaganda poster shows the struggles of a land reform. What happened is that this landlord was pulled out from his house, and he was struggled by the tenants, or villagers, poor villagers. Okay, as I told you, 1 million landlords got killed. Actually, many of them got killed. Many of those who are executed during land reform, they're not necessarily a landlord. They're only labeled of this class name, that is a landlord. A picture taken, a poor peasant criticizing a landlord. But you know, in many places in China, even so-called landlord, they're not rich, right? This landlord also has patches on his clothes. Is a shabby clothes, right? Yeah, this is another landlord. I'm sorry, this is another land reform meeting. Mao's portrait was hanging there, showing the state power. And then the communist cadres means party officials. The communist cadres, they would mobilize the poor peasants to criticize the landlord. If the landlord is criticized to a certain degree, he may be executed immediately. And then the land will be measured and taken by the state. Mafia groups, or so-called counter revolutionaries, anyone the party did not like will be put into prison or executed. For example, the previous nationalist party army officers, typically he will be purged or executed in the 1950s. Okay, and also those collaborators with the Japanese during World War II. If under World War II you're a Japanese you're a collaborator with the Japanese, you're in big trouble. Yeah, a lot of times the trial is very simple. If enough people is charging you in the village, they will have a public meeting like this, and then the local party government would sentence you to death or many years in prison immediately. So this is what happened in the 1950s. Very bloody, brutal movements to eliminate all potential enemies of the state. Okay. And then economically, the party is following a Soviet Union model to have a so-called 5-year plan. So all the economic activities are done by the party state. Okay. No market is allowed. This is communism. So that means if you're a peasant, if you grow, say, peanuts in your own land, and if you and you have a harvest, you want to sell your peanuts on the market to people who want the peanuts, no, you cannot. You cannot. It's illegal. If the state found out that you're selling peanuts you grow privately in your land, you're in prison. You're in prison. There's a law issued by the state to stop that. Okay, because you're practicing capitalism, so you're in prison. During Cultural Revolution, you could be executed immediately because of that. Okay, so the state believed that it's enough for the government to tell all these factories and the farms, state farms, how much they gonna produce and what to produce. So everything is planned, everything is regulated. Unfortunately, this did not work out. Okay, because I mean, as economists have proven again and again and again in human history, no government has the data, the intelligence, and the capabilities to really predict what and how much to produce. So the result of this state command economy is a shortage of everything, just like in Soviet Union. In Soviet Union, when Soviet Union was there, you know that although there are stores are always empty. Okay, everything is a shortage. Okay. So the 5-year plan is the major economic policies, and then everyone in the countryside, starting from 1957, was organized into the People's Commune, and they have no personal property, basically no personal property. Okay, everyone is super poor, and every day they go out to the field to work for the state, and more than 80% of their product is taken away. Yeah, if a famine strikes, millions of people will die. We will tell you this story. And in rural centers, in urban centers, I'm sorry, in cities, people are organized into so-called work units or danwei. For example, if you work for a university, the university is controlled by the party. Okay, if you work for a factory, the factory belongs to the party. There's a party boss running the factory. There's a party boss running the university. So for every work units, there is always a party boss controlling you and reporting to their own party boss. Okay, so it's a hierarchy, it's a pyramid system. So everyone is in the work units. So it's almost like a totalitarian society where everything you do, every decision you make, you know what? My ear is ringing. There's a song ringing in my ears. It's a Stings, the Police band. Every breath you take, every move you make, yeah, someone is watching you. I'll be watching you. Remember the song? But that's typically 1984. George Orwell sense. Okay, so although George Orwell authored the novel 1984 before this time period we're talking about, but what happened in China is exactly like that. Okay, it's a totalitarian society, and also every household must register with the state. Okay, and the free movement of people is not allowed. For example, if you live in the countryside, you say, "Hey, this is too poor. We are having a famine. I want to leave my village because there's nothing to eat. I want to go to a big city to find a job." No, you cannot. You cannot. Or if you live in one city, say in Shanghai city, you want to move to Beijing because you think that there might be a better job opportunity there. No, you cannot move there. Everyone is fixed in the household, registered in the city. This is directly linked with the ration you will receive. Everyone receives a ration, okay? For example, if you are, depending on your class background, you may be supplied with, 32 kilograms of rice every month, okay? That's how much you will receive, okay? As a worker in the work units. If you move to another city, then you lose your household registration. You lose your hukou. This is called a hukou. And then you will not receive that ration. You will starve to death. When you move to another city, it's impossible for you to find a job. And no one is going to accommodate you, because even if you have relatives in the other city, your relatives will receive their own ration based on their own household registration. They wouldn't have a surplus of food for you. So there's no way for free migration of anyone. Everyone is fixed in the same place and doing what the state want them to do. Is that kind of society. Okay, you cannot freely choose city or a job to do. No market, no free migration. Yeah, so that's Maoist socialism. Military is highly emphasized because it's a military. It's the new republic highlights the importance of military. If you serve in the army, at least you'll be free from the famine, because enough food is always prioritized. Military units are always prioritized, even if there's a famine. This is sort of like a North Korea, In North Korea, the situation is similar, okay? Even though ordinary people are starving to death, but the state will not let their military servicemen to starve that much, right? Because they need the military to support the regime. The true foundation of the regime is actually military. So, all right. So yeah, I'll show you some propaganda posters of the Soviet Union supported factory projects. Yeah, and then people are encouraged to sacrifice themselves to work for the state projects, right? Yeah, females are mobilized to serve the state, just like a man. Okay, so if you look at the Chinese communist ideology, very interesting. They say we have a liberal policy towards gender equality. That means females are gonna be freed from their household, and they're gonna be respected just like a man, right? I remember last year, Joe Biden was giving a speech, and he quoted Mao saying, "Women take up half of the sky." Yeah, do a Google search. Women take up half of the sky. This quote is from Mao, from Maoist era. But when Mao said this quote, this sentence, what he really means is that women are state slaves, just like a man. They're gonna be pulled out from their household and work in the field, work in the land. Okay. So same thing. So in other words, population or citizens are basically resources of the state. Okay. The worship of Mao's personality. There's a cult of Mao's personality. Mao is respected as the living God. He's always right? No one can challenge him. No checks and balances. Okay. And there's a Mao's statue established in every city in China. Every city. Okay. Of course, in the 1980s, after Mao died, when China entered a new era, the Deng's era or the economic reform era, many of the Mao statues got toppled down. But there's still many cities in China today that has a Mao statue. This is similar to, when Lenin or Stalin was there, you see Lenin statue or Stalin statue everywhere in the Soviet Union. Same thing, right? Yeah. And Mao considered himself as the orthodox follower of Karl Marx, right? So you have this propaganda poster everywhere in China. You will see Karl Marx here as the originator of Marxism. And then you have Engels, Karl Marx's best friend. And then you have Vladimir Lenin, okay? And okay, Mao as a god, Mao as a living god. Okay, so we're talking about the cult of Mao's personality. So there's a Mao's statue established everywhere in China, in every city. And Mao considered himself as the orthodox follower of Karl Marx, right? So you will see this propaganda poster in China everywhere, right? With the Karl Marx there, Engels there, and then Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, and then Mao. Okay, so what's interesting about this picture is that in Maoist China, only these communists are recognized as the legitimate communists. Okay. Yeah, for example, if you're a socialist or communist in Europe and you disagree with Joseph Stalin, but you still agree with Karl Marx, no, you're not recognized as an orthodox communist. Okay, so this is why in 1952, Joseph Stalin died. Okay, Joseph Stalin died in Soviet Union, and then we know that after some power struggle, Khrushchev rose to power in Soviet Union. And then in 1956, I'm sorry, 1950, is it 1956 or 1957? At the 8th Congress, at the 20th Party Congress of Soviet Union, Khrushchev released a so-called secret report on Stalin. to criticize and to denounce all the crimes that Stalin committed. So Khrushchev actually denounced Stalin at the 20th Party Congress of Soviet Union. When the news arrived at Beijing, Mao was unhappy. Mao did not like what Khrushchev did. Okay, although on one hand, China was still receiving all this technical support, financial support from Khrushchev. Khrushchev continued the Soviet Union's friendly relationship with China, and he provided, just like Stalin, he provided a lot of financial, technical aids to China. But Mao disagreed with the Khrushchev in his denouncing of Stalin. Okay, so this is the origin of China-Soviet split. And then later, when Khrushchev was removed, and then Brezhnev rose to power, the debate between China and the Soviet Union continued. Okay, we're going to talk about the People's Commune and the Great Leap Forward movement, yeah, to understand the split of between China and Soviet Union. All right, so okay, very briefly, I'm going to talk about diplomacy. In 1949, Mao decided that they gotta diplomatically, China is gonna side with the Soviet Union and all other communist countries, including North Korea, including Vietnam, including East European communist countries. Okay, so China is gonna isolate, is gonna cut off relations with the West. Okay, the United States became an enemy later. But in 1949, it was not very clear because the United States still want to maintain a normal diplomatic relations with the communists. But Mao decided that no, because if you want to side with Stalin in the Cold War, of course you cannot. It's very hard for you to maintain a friendly relationship with the United States at the same time, right? So Mao decided that no, they're gonna cut off relations with the United States. Eventually, Beijing kicked out the U.S. embassy from Nanjing, And then in 1950, the Korean War broke out. We know that Korean War broke out because of Kim Il-sung, the North Korean communist leader, decided that he's gonna unify Korea. So situation in Korea, very simply, okay, very quickly, we're gonna mention this, is that before and during World War II, Korea was a Japanese colony. Remember, China lost Korea in 1895 after the first Sino-Japanese War, at the same time when China lost Taiwan, right? Yeah. But of course, Korea is a little bit different from Taiwan because the Korean king ruled Korea. Okay, the Chinese only had an indirect sort of influence on Korea, but after the first Sino-Japanese War, Korea became a Japanese colony. And this situation, just like Taiwan, Korea maintained as a Japanese colony until 1949, when World War II ended. Okay, when World War II ended, according to the agreements between the powers, North Korea is going to be controlled by Soviet Red Army. Remember, the Soviets attacked China's Manchuria to defeat the Japanese. Some of the Red Army also entered North Korea, okay? And then the Americans controlled South Korea. So that's the agreement between Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union chose a North Korean communist guerrilla fighter called Kim Il-sung. During World War II, Kim Il-sung was fighting in Manchuria and sometimes in Siberia as sort of as a Soviet Union trained and led guerrilla fighter against Japanese. So that's why he was chosen by Stalin. So so Stalin sent him to using Soviet Union Navy. Kim Il-sung was transported from Siberia to North Korea after the war, and he became the leader of North Korea. At the same time, the United States also chose a Princeton graduate, someone trained and educated in the United States, to be the president of South Korean Republic of Korea. So there are two Korean governments, okay, after the war. And then in 1950, Kim Il-sung got support from both Stalin and Mao to sort of launch a war to unify his own country. So in June 1950, a Korean War broke out. Okay, and then with the Chinese support and the Soviet support, Kim Il-sung's North Korean army very quickly took Seoul because they attacked South Korea by surprise. And then within several weeks, they pushed. Korea is not a big country, so very quickly the North Korean army pushed the South Korean army and the American army to this very small area called Pusan city in South Korea Peninsula. Yeah. And then in September 1950, General Douglas MacArthur launched a landing in Incheon, a place near Seoul. So this landing was successful. It cut off the supply line of the North Korean army to the south. So within weeks, the North Korean army collapsed. And then from Incheon, MacArthur was leading his American troops. In this case, the American army was authorized by the United Nations. United Nations was the international organization that emerged after World War II. So with the authorization of the UN, the American troops are pushing northwards. Okay, by October and November, MacArthur has crossed the so-called 38th parallel, which is the 38th parallel is the divide between Soviet occupied area and American occupied area in the peninsula. So when MacArthur was winning, so he crossed the 30th parallel and he pushed all the way to the Korean-China border. And this is considered as a threat by Mao. Okay, so in October and November, Mao sent more than 200,000 Chinese PRC soldiers, and they arrived Korea in the name of volunteers, but they're not actually not volunteers. They're just sent by their state. So they ambushed in the winter of 1950. The Chinese Communist Army ambushed MacArthur in North Korea. So when the Americans got ambushed, of course, they did not know how many enemies are coming, so they decided that they gotta retreat. So yeah, so the Americans got pushed back all the way down to 30th parallel. And then the Chinese communists, they were running down with the Soviet firearms and military support. They took Seoul. And then when the American military force realized that the Chinese had a serious problem with the logistics and the supplies, they launched several campaigns to push back the Chinese. So, and then eventually, after 3 years of fighting, the situation became stalemated. It's a tie, okay? So in 1953, when the war finally, when the armistice was finally signed by both sides, you have this line around the 30th parallel, cutting off the peninsula, okay? So this is why there are two Korean governments today, okay? Yeah, because of China's military intervention and the United States. So you think about that. But the Korean people, they really have a very sad history during the war, because when World War II ended, a lot of Koreans thought, finally they're gonna enjoy independence, they're gonna enjoy peace and prosperity, but those things did not come. Okay, in 1950, the war broke out, and look at the city of Seoul. When Kim Il-sung launched the war, Seoul was taken by North Koreans first time. It changed hands the first time. Okay, when the communists came, they had a purge, they had a massacre, they killed anyone they did not like. Okay, and then when MacArthur landed in Incheon, the Americans and South Koreans took the city of Seoul again, second time. It changed hands, and then there's a massacre because the South Koreans, they got to kill a lot of people in sympathy to North Korean communist government, right? So there's a killing on both sides. And then when Chinese intervened in the war, the Chinese attacked and took Seoul in 1951. So Seoul, the city, changed hands for the third time. And then in several months, the Americans pushed back and they took Solu again. So the city changed hand for the fourth time. And every time when the city changed hands, there's a massacre. Think about how terrible things are. So the Korean people really had a very poignant history, very sad history in this war, right? In this war, there is Soviets, there are Chinese, there are Americans, there are many other, there are troops from many other countries authorized by the UN, but the people who suffer the most are Koreans themselves. Think about that, right? It's a terrible, terrible, terrible war. And today we know that North Korean government is still there, and the political power is inherited within the Kim family. It's a family run. It's a even compared to other communist states, North Korea is an exception. Because almost all other communist countries, you don't see this power is handed down to your own son, right? This is not communism. This is imperialism, right? This is like the traditional kingdom or empire. So how come you do this in a communist country? It's very difficult to justify this kind of a political practice, right? Yeah, pictures of Incheon landing. This is a GIs, American GIs landed in Incheon. And then on the other hand, the Chinese are crossing the Yalu River, crossing the China-Korean border, they're entering Korea. And then, yeah, if you go to Washington, D.C., you will see this Korean War Memorial. It shows the retreat from North Korea when they were probably ambushed by the Chinese. Yeah, so the war lasted for 3 years, and American 50,000 American lives were lost, and close to 1 million Chinese lives were lost. So it's a terrible, terrible war, and this is a war that both sides wanted to forget about until recently. You know, when Xi Jinping rose to power since 10 years ago, Xi Jinping is encouraged this anti-American sentiment in China. So Korean War is picked up, is used by the state propaganda system to sort of to show the Chinese communist determination to resist or to fight against Americans. Really forward in 1957, this marked Mao's new policy to industrialize China. How about we have a break? Can we have a break maybe? And then we will come back to discuss the Great Leap Forward. Okay, turn on recording. All right, let's resume our discussion. So in 1957, Mao launched a series of movements. Most important of them is the People's Commune and the Great Leap Forward, right? People's Commune, we mentioned this before. That means that everyone in the countryside is organized into this commune. Their personal properties are all taken away. And every day they're gonna come out to the field to work for the state. And then they paid a very meager salary, very, very meager salary by the People's Commune. So they basically become slaves of the state farms. And then close to 90% of their products were taken away by the state. Great Leap Forward. Great Leap Forward is a movement when Mao tried to sort of boost agricultural production. It did not work out. Instead, it encouraged a lot of local party bosses to lie about their agricultural products, because Mao basically sending out a message to all the local party bosses saying, whoever can boost agricultural product will be promoted, okay, and will be praised by me. Yeah, since Mao is considered as this living god, everyone wants to sort of get this praise from Mao. So their local party bosses are lying about their agricultural production. But Mao thought it was, at a certain point, Mao thought it was real. And then Mao was seriously worrying that what are we going to do with all this food, since we are having all this rice? Okay, so he's seriously considering this. Yeah, and this is from a local report, a local newspaper. Local newspaper report that for like 1/5 acre of land, not very big, 1/5 acre of land. The local farmers produced close to what is that? 5,000 kilograms of rice. That's impossible. That's totally impossible. Scientifically, that's impossible. But this is published on the Communist newspaper. Great Leap Forward also encourages local villagers, farmers, to create steel. We know that's impossible. I mean, farmers don't have the kind of a technology to produce steel in the countryside. But Mao encouraged them to produce steel so that China's steel production would surpass the United Kingdom in 1958. Okay, so Mao encouraged them people to do that, and he mobilized everyone in the country to produce steel. So people take off their doorknobs, they melted down their bicycles, they melted down their walk, they melted down everything in the backyard furnaces. These are the backyard furnaces. And then all they get is not steel, but pig iron. Pig iron is iron that's totally useless. And in order to have the fuel for those furnaces, the Chinese farmers cut down a lot of forests, a lot of trees. This is detrimental to the environment. But environment only is a small effect compared to the famine it brought. So all these movements did not bring anything. Also in People's Commune, since they're having communism, private property is taken away. Everyone at first is allowed to eat in the common dining hall like this for free. Okay, you can eat as much as you want and for free. I mean, for thousands of years, Chinese famines always suffer famine. Chinese peasants suffer famine periodically, but now they can eat as much as they want. Of course, they eat all the food. They eat all the crops. Women, of course, is also encouraged to work in the field, just like a man. The result is famine that came in 1959. In 1959, there's a huge famine. Millions of people died of the famine. Yeah. Well, let me tell you my family story. My father, when the Great Famine happened between 1959 to 1961, he was lucky enough to live in the city because, if he had lived in the countryside, he probably would have starved to death or something. But food was provided to urban centers as a priority. So that's the good thing. But still, even for a city boy, he still suffered starvation. Not to mention people on the countryside. And my grandparents had to sell some of their family heirloom during the famine in order to exchange for food to supply to provide with their children with the food. Yeah, there's a lot of poignant stories about the Great Famine. How many people died of the famine, we still don't know, but reasonable estimates range from 20 million to 40 million. So this is the biggest famine that ever happened in human history. Yeah. There's one story told by a famine survivor. He says, at a certain point, there's nothing to eat in the village. So people search for rodents. People dig for insects. People try to catch birds. People try to catch, cats, anything to eat them in order to survive. But in the end, they eat everything in the village. Everything in the village. And a poor woman is coming to a local party official, because party officials normally had more to eat. The woman coming to the party official saying she is willing to sell sex for only a handful of watermelon seeds, just a handful of watermelon seeds. And the party official happens to have that. So he gave her this handful of watermelon seeds, and she was willing to sell sex. But you know what? This party official he himself is suffering starvation so much that he becomes impotent. Because when you suffer starvation that much, you actually you lose the ability to have sex in that case. So that's how terrible this whole thing is. Yeah. one party leader called Peng Dehuai. In 1959, he saw all this famine, and he believed that people's commune is the reason. Of course, people's commune is the reason for the famine. The Chinese Communist Party blamed natural disasters for the famine. They say for those 3 years, we suffered natural disasters, droughts and floods. But you know what? This is not true, because the records show that there wasn't a natural disaster during those 3 years. So Mao was lying. So Peng Dehuai in 1959, he criticized Mao's radical communist policies. He says maybe we should reverse all these policies, okay? Because all these policies are resulting in disasters in countryside, especially in his home. He visited his hometown in Hunan, and he saw all these people dying for starvation. So Peng Dehuai, this is a picture of Peng Dehuai as the commander of the Chinese army in Korea, talking to Kim Il-sung. Okay, so in 1959, Peng Dehuai, the Korean War hero, criticized Mao Zedong for the crazy communist policies. For that reason, Peng Dehuai was purged. He was kicked out from the government, and then he died in prison. He died in prison a couple of years later. So no one can challenge Mao's policies, even though those policies are totally disastrous. So you can imagine that in a totalitarian society, where there's no checks and balances, any mistakes or misconception or bad policies could lead to huge disasters. So the leaders' mistakes will be magnified by the totalitarian political system, resulting in catastrophes. Okay. Yeah, and then, all right, so let's move on a little bit quick. All right, so the famine lasted all the way until 1961, until Mao himself realized that it's probably wrong to do this. So since 1962, a guy called Deng Xiaoping and Liu Shaoqi over here. This is Liu Shaoqi, and this is Deng Xiaoping. Liu was basically Mao's right-hand man, his right-hand man. Both Liu and Deng realized that maybe they should reverse this communist policy to give peasants a little bit of freedom so that they can decide, they can be given a small piece of land, and then they can decide what to plant. So in other words, Liu and Deng decided that they're gonna remove a little bit the state command economic policies and give peasants a little bit of freedom. And that immediately solved the problem. Okay, agricultural production recovered in 1962 thanks to these liberal policies. But Mao did not like that. Mao in 1962, for the very first time, had to do a self-criticism. At a meeting called the 7,000 people, 7,000 cadre meeting. And Mao was preparing for a counter strike to remove both Liu and Deng. Well, Deng eventually came back and launched economic reform. We're going to talk about him next time, but here we're just going to mention him very, very briefly. Okay, Cultural Revolution. So in 1966, Mao launched the last revolution of his life. And in this revolution, Mao smashed the party and the government he created himself. Because in 1966, when Liu is rising, Mao felt like he's losing power, he's losing control of the party. So as a result, he wanted to get back the hold of the government and the party, but he first must smash it. And the political force he tried to, he relies on for the revolution are not ordinary party members, but instead young men. Because Mao doesn't trust the party anymore, okay? Although he created the party. Mao wanted to mobilize the young men and send out a call to the young men directly so that they could rise up from bottom and smash the government Mao did not trust. So that's his concern. So he has multiple purposes for launching Cultural Revolution. Power struggle is first. He wanted to remove Liu and Deng. Second, he doesn't trust the party and the government anymore. He wanted to mobilize young men to rise up and do a new revolution against the party. Fourth, he wanted to find a new generation of successors. Okay, remember, succession is always a big problem for communist states. All right, after the old dictator died, how are you going to find the next dictator? How are you going to find the next ruler? It's a difficult question, right? Since Mao doesn't trust the party anymore, he wants to find a new generation of successor among young revolutionaries. So he wanted to give them this environment of a revolution to find the new successors. So there are multiple purposes. Okay. All right. So in 1966, Mao mobilized young men, especially the college students. Okay, college students like you guys. Mao mobilized them to criticize their own university administration. In Beijing University, that's where the Cultural Revolution broke out. College students are always not happy with the college, right? I mean, parking, cafeteria, right? Class registration, all kinds of complaints, right? But now Mao told them that if you don't like your president, your college president, university president, you know what? Storm her office, pull her out of her office and beat her up. That's why we do revolution. Yeah, because Mao has this famous saying. He says, 革命不是请客吃饭. Revolution is not a dinner party. Revolution is not a dinner party. It's a violence about one class overturning another class. So in Mao's eyes, those party officials that he did not like have already turned into so-called capitalist class. I mean, this is a ridiculous definition, but he just made that charge. So yeah, so college students, if you don't like your professor, or you don't like your university president, you storm their office, pull them out and beat them up, and then in 1 month, in one month alone, in 1967 and 1968, at Beijing University alone, in 1 month, there are more than 100 professors beaten to death during the revolution. And those young men who are mobilized by Mao, they are called the Red Guards, 红卫兵, the Red Guards of Mao Zedong. That's what they call themselves. Okay, that's what they call themselves. So let me tell you a couple of stories. Yeah, this is a typical propaganda poster. High school students, college students are mobilized to smash down the old world. Yeah, the words on this poster reads, 打碎旧世界，创立新世界. Smash the old world and create a new one. Okay, yeah. And Mao told the police and the PRC and the PLA to hold back. So police were told by Mao to hold back when they see revolution on the street. Mao says it's normal. Okay, it's normal. That's exactly what we want to see. And if you see people are killing other people, they're just doing revolution. Police should not intervene. Actually, police chiefs themselves are pulled out from their office and beaten up by the Red Guards. So for like 2 or 3 years, between 1966 and 1969, there's an anarchy in China. And that's exactly what Mao wants to see. In a letter Mao wrote to his own wife, called Jiang Qing, Jiang Qing became a major leader of the Cultural Revolution, Mao's wife. In the letter Mao wrote to his wife, Mao says, only great chaos will lead to great order. So he's using this very ironic, strange, dialectical way of thinking. Yeah. So he believed that only great chaos could create great order. Yeah. So for 8 times, Mao welcomed Red Guards visiting Beijing, and he organized huge parades and a huge meeting in Tiananmen Square, at the heart of Beijing city, and Mao was waving to the Red Guards. Each time Mao waved to more than 1 million Red Guards, and my father was one of them. Yeah, my father was one of them. My father told me that in the year of 1967, I believe. Yeah, he got this free train ride from Nanjing City to Beijing to join the big parade. And the train station was told by Mao to give a free ride to Red Guards. So they're sleeping everywhere in a train car. Yeah, even the baggage rack was full of people, full of young men. Everyone is going to Beijing, and in Beijing, everyone is waving this little red book of Mao. Did you notice that they're waving a little book, a booklet, a red book? This is called Mao's red book. It contains the excerpts of Mao's speeches. For example, revolution is not a dinner party, right? This is on one of the pages, okay? And you would wave this red book at those rallies, at those big rallies. I remember my father told me that he was so excited to see Mao personally. Mao standing there like a god, like a living god, emitting radius. And he said, I was shouting, I was jumping, for like hours. In the end, I lost both my shoes. That's what he told me. Yeah. So in 1969, when the American young men, they're being so excited at Woodstock for rock and roll, the Chinese young men in Beijing, they're shouting for long live Chairman Mao. So there's a global sort of a movement of a young man revolution or youngsters movement in 1960s. Very interesting, very interesting. Yeah. In 1968, we know that the radical young men, they're storming their university presidents' offices in Columbia University, at Harvard University. In China, they're doing similar thing. They're doing similar things. Yeah. High school students were given firearms by local military, and Mao told them, the PLA commanders, to say, you want to support the revolutionaries. Okay, Mao gave a very vague order to the military commanders to support the revolutionaries. And then the next day, some high school students come to the local garrison, say, we want firearms, give us firearms, and we want to launch a revolution. So these high school students, they're given AK-47, grenades, all machine guns, all kinds of weapons, and then they come back to their university campus to do revolution. Let me tell you this story from my big uncle. My uncle, he was older than my father. So when Cultural Revolution broke out, he was already in college. Yeah. And he became a leader of a local Red Guard group. And then one day, my grandparents found out that my uncle returned back home from his college campus in another city, and he brought 2 guns with him. And even when he was taking a shower, he still keep the 2 guns with him. So my grandparents asked my uncle, well, what are you doing? We sent you to a university to study, but why you came back home with the 2 guns? And you kept the guns with you all day. that my uncle told my grandparents, saying, my faction of the Red Guards lost the war in the university campus, so we got kicked out. We got kicked out, and I know that the other faction is coming to get me, so I have to keep guns with me even when I take shower. So that's how crazy it is. And I remember when I was young, I read a newsletter published by a Red Guard faction in a university. I still clearly remember what the newsletter says. The newsletter says, according to, in response to Mao's call, we're launching revolution in our university campus. We put out all the anti-revolutionaries we think are anti-revolutionaries. Most of them are professors, okay? We put them into black jail. But on the other day, the other faction come attacking us. They attacked our dormitory, okay? They used the machine guns, grenades to attack our dormitory. And we defended our dormitory with the landmines and other tools. So they're killing each other. They're killing each other. Yeah. So that kind of college life. Okay. In college, you're supposed to be boozing, partying, and dating. But these young Chinese young men, they're killing each other using AK-47. So very, very crazy, crazy eras. Well, my father, he was he got all A's when he was in high school, but unfortunately, when the Cultural Revolution broke out in 1966, he was just about to get into college. Without a Cultural Revolution, he probably could have got into college, but since the Cultural Revolution has broken out, Mao eventually shut down all universities. And Mao sent all the young men in 1968 to countryside, to solve the Civil War problem. Because there's a Civil War, there's a fighting on street everywhere. So Mao eventually sent all the young men to the countryside. This is called a 上山下乡, rustification. So my father, after 2 years of revolution or anarchy in the city, eventually he was sent down to the countryside, where there is no school, no electricity, no running water. They have to build up the house they're living themselves, and he had to feed the pigs, work in the land all day. In an age when he wanted to study, to learn knowledge the most, he was sent down to countryside for almost 10 years until Mao died. Only after Mao died, all these millions of young men were allowed to come back to the city. So it's a very, very radical policies, traditions. Okay, Mao also ordered the Red Guards to turn against China, to criticize Chinese traditions, and what they did is violence. Okay, so there are several pictures here. The Confucian Temple, biggest Confucian temple in Confucius' hometown in Qufu City in Shandong province, was almost demolished by Red Guards. The Red Guards stormed the Confucian temple, and they basically vandalized the statue of Confucius, and then they put a sign, on Confucius statue, and the sign reads 头号大混蛋, 头号大混蛋, #1 big asshole. That's what they put. That's what they call Confucius, because they want to trash all the traditions, right? And then they also criticize Buddhism. These Red Guards, they forced Buddhist monks to come out from their temple, from their monastery, and they were forced to hold up this very insulting sign to self-criticize. And the sign says, 什么佛经净放狗屁? It reads, your Buddhist sutra is nothing but dog farts. Yeah, so this is basically just insult of all religions, because all these religions are considered as people's opium, right? That's a communist understanding. And they're burning down. The Red Guards are just like Hitler's youth. They're burning down books. They're burning down books. They're burning down antiques. They're destroying everything, all the antiques from China's past. For example, this a big sign given by traditional Chinese emperors to the Confucius temple. It says 万世师表, exemplary model for teachers for 10,000 generations. This is a high praise that traditional emperor give to Confucius. All these were burned. Yeah, and they're burning books. You see that they're burning books and antiques during the Cultural Revolution. Yeah, this is called destroying the so-called 4 Odes: the old tradition, old customs, old cultures. All these are destroyed. And Liu Shaoqi, this is Liu Shaoqi, Mao's #1 political rival, was struggled by young students, by Red Guards, and eventually he died in prison 3 years later. So it's a very brutal revolution, okay, and an anarchy. Soviets Soviet Union leaders already disagreed with the Mao's policies since the Great Leap Forward. When all the backyard furnaces are set up in countryside, Khrushchev openly said, "This is craziness." Yeah, so Khrushchev ridiculed Mao's radical communist policies. So since early 1960s, Mao fights back. Okay, the Chinese Communist Party is criticizing Soviet Union Party. The Soviet Union Party is also criticizing Mao. So during the whole 1960s, the diplomatic relations between Soviet Union and China got stopped, interrupted. And then in 1969, the two communist countries even got into a military conflict in our northern border. This is called a Zhenbaodao skirmish in 1969. And during the skirmish, Mao basically had the PLA soldiers to ambush a company of Soviet Red Army, and they killed all of them basically. And then the Soviets came back to bomb at the Chinese. In 1969, Brezhnev and his government seriously considered using atomic weapons on Chinese cities. So yeah, we were pretty close to a nuclear war, okay, in 1969. But at that time, the United States came out they sent a message to Soviet Union saying, if you use a nuclear weapon on China, this will be considered as a provoke on the United States as well. So the United States is forcing Soviet Union to solve the conflict peacefully. So Soviet leader, at that moment, the Soviet leaders realized that, from Khrushchev's time, there's a telephone hotline between Moscow and Beijing, but it hasn't been used for years. But now, since Moscow wanted to solve the crisis peacefully, so the Soviet leaders picked up the hotline. To their surprise, someone they called Beijing through using the hotline. To their surprise, someone picked up the phone. It's a Chinese operator. And the Chinese operator is using a Russian, saying, "You Soviet people have betrayed communism. You're the capitalist rulers." This is a specific term to call those Soviet who, in Mao's eyes, have deviated from communist tradition. So the operator says, "You're capitalist rulers. You betrayed communism. I'm not gonna connect you with our chairman Mao." So he hung up on Soviet leader. But eventually, the whole crisis was solved peacefully. So Mao purged almost all his rivals, and he got a strong support from the military. This guy called the Lin Biao, a Civil War hero, strongly supported Mao to purge everyone Mao did not like. And then when Mao purged everyone he did not like Lin Biao either. So in 1971, Mao wanted Lin Biao to do self-criticism, but Lin Biao refused. And then at one night, Lin Biao tried to flee to Soviet Union, and the airplane crashed in Mongolia, and Lin Biao and his whole family died there. During the whole Cultural Revolution, Lin Biao was the number 2 leader of China. So this crash of Lin Biao really became a blow to the whole idea of the Cultural Revolution, A lot of people started to think, after all this craziness, what did we get? Is this really common? Is this really revolution? Chaos, anarchy, violence, killing, poverty, and the economy is also on the brink of collapse. So the death of Lin Biao made many people to really reflect upon the validity of the Cultural Revolution. My father was one of them. I remember my father told me that when the news of Lin Biao's death reached the countryside where he worked, he was reading the so-called, Mao published Lin Biao's son's a document of his revolt. Mao believed that Lin Biao's son is preparing for a coup d'etat against himself. And he published this document, okay? In this document, Lin Biao's son criticized the Cultural Revolution, saying this is a craziness. This is not a communist revolution. Okay, and Mao published this document in an attempt to show how evil the Ling family is. But when a lot of Chinese young men in countryside, when they are deprived of the right to receive education, to enjoy modern life, when they read this document that criticizes Mao, a lot of them actually agreed with the Ling Biaosang's criticism. Okay, so Mao actually miscalculated a lot of times during the Cultural Revolution. So eventually, after Ling Biao's death, who saved Mao? It was Americans. The only good news in the 1970s for Mao is the coming of President Nixon. Okay, President Nixon. President Nixon, we know, I mean, if you know the history of diplomacy between China and the United States, you know that with the help of the State Secretary, Mr. Kissinger, Nixon made this new strategic plan to ally with Red China. Because the Americans in early 1970s, they already know the conflict between Soviet Union and China. So to follow the idiom that your enemy's enemy may be your friend, Nixon reached out to China, hoping that the two powers may form some kind of a military alliance against their common enemy, in this case, the Soviet Union. So Nixon visited China, and he was welcomed by Mao. Yeah. Okay, so this is a Kissinger meeting with Mao. Yeah. So in early 1970s, United States and China formed a de facto military alliance. The U.S. satellites monitoring Soviet Union. They're sending all the intelligence they're sharing the intelligence with Beijing. And Beijing was also given all these American advanced weapons like a Black Hawk helicopters, right? Through the 1970s and 80s, there's a lot of a military alliance and the communication and the cooperation between the United States and China. But neither sides want to talk about it. Neither sides want to talk about that, right? Because the United States don't want to talk about that because Red China used to be your enemy, right? You fought against them during Korean War, but how come you're supporting them now, right? It's kind of difficult to validate. On the Chinese side, it's also difficult to explain this new alliance with the United States to China's other allies like North Korea and North Vietnam. Remember, Nixon visited China when the Vietnam War was still going on, right? Okay, we do not have time to talk about a Vietnam War, but North Vietnam could fight against the United States for so many years, for 10 years, because it's got a support from both China and Soviet Union. Okay, and once China got into this alliance with the United States, this puts the Vietcong, the Vietnamese communists, in a very difficult position, right? The same thing is true for North Koreans, right? The North Koreans, some of them thought they got betrayed by Chinese Communist Party when China welcomed the Nixon's visit. So this is a very complicated situation. But in Mao's eyes, this is a victory, okay? Because Mao's number one enemy in the 1970s is the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union put more than 1 million troops along the China border, and they were preparing for an attack on Beijing anytime. And Beijing is only, I don't know, like 200 miles, 300 miles from Mongolia, where Red Army is. So if the Soviets want to attack China, they could send their tanks to Beijing in like 1 day or two, or perhaps several hours. It could be. So Mao's number one military enemy in the 1970s became the Soviet Union. So this pushed Mao to form this military alliance with Americans. Okay, so this is to explain why there's this honeymoon period between China and the United States. Okay, the ending of a cultural revolution. Mao believed that revolution must be conducted once every couple of years, maybe once every 10 years or 15 years. This is a new idea he put forward in his later years. This is called the permanent revolution. Okay, this is his contribution to the whole theory of communism. A permanent revolution. Yeah, people needs revolution every like 10 to 15 years. But there's only one limit to this idea. That is his own life. He's gonna die, like everyone, right? So eventually in 1976, he died. He finally died, okay? Well, before he died, there was already some protests, some protests that criticized Mao in a sort of not a very open or apparent way. But Mao sensed this sentiment from the population, from the populace, and he did not like that. Yeah, in the last 2 years of his life, he promoted Deng Xiaoping to become the vice premier of the state council because he had got no one to use. He purged almost everyone in his government. So in 1975, he picked Deng Xiaoping to become the vice premier. But then he kicked him out from the government when he forced Deng Xiaoping to praise the Cultural Revolution. But Deng Xiaoping refused. Well, eventually in September 1976, Mao died. And he right before he died, he picked up a guy called Hua Guofeng to become his successor. And his wife Jiang Qing is also in the Politburo, and the radical members, his radical followers in Cultural Revolution, like Zhang Chunqiao, Yao Wenyuan, they're all, or Wang Hongwen, they're all in the Politburo, So Mao died not knowing whether his legacy of a cultural revolution is going to continue or not. But after he died, the party decided that they're gonna worship Mao's mummy, just like the Soviets did to Vladimir Lenin. Remember, when after Lenin died, his body was mummified and put into a crystal coffin like this, and it was preserved at the Red Square in Moscow. Anyone know, right? Yeah. So Lenin's mummy was there as a sort of a secret site for communists until the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991. Well, Stalin did not have this privilege because Khrushchev did not like him. Khrushchev denounced Stalin, so Stalin's body was not mummified, but Lenin's body was mummified. So when Mao died in 1976, the Chinese Communist Party wanted to mummify his body. But the problem is they did not have that technology. And the Soviet Union was an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party, so they cannot ask the Soviets for this mummification technology. You know how they got this technology? The Vietnamese followed Lenin's tradition by mummifying Ho Chi Minh's body. And the Vietnamese were friends, right? So the Chinese got this technology from Vietnamese. So they mummified Mao's body and put him into a crystal coffin. So Mao is lying there like a Snow White in a crystal coffin, except there's no prince to come to kiss him. But instead, his body was guarded by PLA soldiers. Okay, yeah, and at the heart of Tiananmen Square, a huge mausoleum, a huge tomb was built to preserve Mao's mummy. Okay, so every day you could every morning you could get in a line in front of the mausoleum and pay respect to Mao's mummy. But the problem is, mummification is a pretty complicated technology. Okay, it requires you to do something to the body even before the death, but they didn't do this before Mao died, right? So the mummification was not very successful. So Mao, as a result, Mao's body is shrinking. It's shrinking. It's losing every year. Is losing either a ear or a nose or something, a piece of flesh. So today in Mao's mausoleum in Beijing, you won't see Mao's real body. They put a wax statue there. Actually, it's a wax statue. Okay. Okay, the real body is, I don't know where that is. It's probably in the storage or something. Anyway, so if you really want to pay respect to Mao, yes, you could go to his mausoleum and pay respect to his mummy, shrouded by the party's flag. This is the party's flag. Okay. All right, back to politics. Within 1 month after Mao died, Cultural Revolution was ended. So what does this mean? Everybody hated that. Okay, nobody was really supporting the Cultural Revolution except for Mao's radical followers. Okay, so within 1 month after Mao died, the radical followers of Mao, including Mao's own wife and his nephew, and the vice president of the party that Mao chose for him as successor, Wang Hongwen, all these people are arrested within 1 month. So in other words, there's a coup d'etat launched in the party. The senior party members arrested all these radical followers of Mao. Okay, this is Jiang Qing, Mao's wife, and this is the Wang Hongwen, the vice president of the party, and some other members. All these supporters of the Cultural Revolution were all in prison. Mao did not leave a legacy for his Cultural Revolution. Nobody liked that. Okay, and then very quickly, Deng was welcomed back to the Politburo, and Deng very quickly rose to become the #1 leader of the party. And next time we're gonna talk about how Deng reversed Mao's communist policies and introduced free market and capitalism and opened up China. This is called economic reform. Deng's economic reform shaped what's called the economic miracle that we see in China for the past 40 years. So Mao did not industrialize China that much. Okay, Mao left us a China that is one of the poorest communist countries, but only Deng changed it to become the second largest economic entity in the world. So we're going to talk about China's economic miracle next time. In the 1980s, when China opened up thanks to Deng's new policies, a BBC reporter was able to visit Beijing. Okay, so only after Mao died, foreign reporters were able to enter China to visit Beijing. And a BBC reporter noticed that there's a guy who would get in the line to visit Mao's mausoleum every day. So the reporter interviewed that guy. The reporter asked, "You visit Mao's mausoleum every day. Do you love him so much that you want to see him every day?" Well, that person answered, "No." He says, every day, I want to make sure he's dead. Yeah, that's the answer. Okay, so this will end up our discussion today.